To talk more about Ms. Swaraj's comments, I'm joined in the studio by senior journalist Arun Anand. Also on the broadcast with us via the phone line is strategic affairs expert Brahma Chilani. I'm also joined on the phone line by Dr. Sreeram Chaulia. He is the professor and dean at Jindal School of International Affairs. Mr. Chaulia, thanks very much for speaking with us here on the broadcast. If I can ask you, where does Bhutan stand in all of this? India has always demonstrated, a great degree of, let's say, support for all of its allies. But has Bhutan sort of become a pawn in some ways between the standoff, in the standoff between the two Asian giants?
I don't think so. I think Bhutan is relying heavily on India to be able to counterbalance much mightier and heavier player, which is China. The Bhutanese have a dispute with the Chinese over Doklam, where we have been assisting the Bhutanese to prevent the Chinese from building motorable roads that can ultimately lead to mini invasion and deprivation of Bhutan's sovereign rights. So Bhutan is interested in actually negotiated settlement with the Chinese on these issues, but the Chinese are preempting them by using blackmail strategy through building these roads. And I think we have come to the assistance of a smaller player. And of course, our own national security is at stake. But at the same time, our credibility as an ally. Remember, Bhutan has no diplomatic relations with China. It's heavily reliant on India for its national security. So I think India's credibility as a net provider of security is at stake with Bhutan. And I think we are lending a hand to a very, very needy and weak country. So in that context, the Chinese have been trying to raise the issue of Indian hegemony over Bhutan. But if you actually look at it carefully, on the issue of Doklam, they are heavily outnumbered and outmaneuvered by China in the past. And it's the first time that finally they have gotten some spine because of India's proactive measures. So I think we should be proud of the fact that India has actually come to the rescue of what was going to be a losing cause for Bhutan.
But Dr. Chaulia, if I can come to you, has this statement come too late? Has India lost precious time in responding to what Mr. Chilani has called China's psychological warfare?
Well, I think the parliament session has just begun, so the timing is explained by that. But I think it is important that the government reached a consensus with the opposition parties and brief them before making this statement so that there's complete national unanimity on this subject. I think it's also important that Sushma Swaraj has made the point that we can defend ourselves, especially at this location, which is currently under the radar, the Tri-Junction. We have relatively better capabilities to defend our positions. So I think the Chinese are resorting to this psychological warfare and threats and media hostility. One of their diplomats has said there are only three options for the Indians. Either they vacate, as in like withdraw Doklam, or be captured or get killed. You know, this kind of like real red meat kind of emotional outbursts from China are somewhat uncharacteristic, and it shows that they are rattled because they had not expected that India would come to the rescue of Bhutan and also defend its national interests so proactively. So I think there is an issue with the overall LAC preparedness. We are vulnerable in different sectors. And I anticipate that the Chinese may try their usual trick, which is to do incursions in Ladakh or towards Arunachal side. I mean, those are always the threats, and we need to be prepared for them. So if Sushma Swaraj is coming on Parliament and saying that we are capable of defending ourselves and that we don't take the threats too seriously, I think we need to put our money and our investments and our forces where our words are, and by which I mean we need to really strengthen our defensive capabilities all across the 4,057-kilometer long line of actual control, because until we do that, we will not be able to sustain this position for too long in Doklam.
But Dr. Chaulia, if I can ask you that going by Ms. Swaraj's comments in Parliament today, how do you perceive this playing out in the next couple of days, weeks, months? What are we looking at? How exactly is the standoff going to resolve itself, or is the world community going to have to step in? What's going to happen next, in your opinion?
I think our call for China to roll back its unilateral intervention in Doklam will prevail because the Chinese, of course, have raised the tempo and the stakes by challenging and even threatening full-scale war all along the LAC. But if you study their current economic condition, as well as their overall relationship with the United States and with the rest of the world, they cannot risk this full-scale conflict that they are crowing about in the media. So we must take some of these threats with a pinch of salt. But as I said, our self-defense preparedness is the key. If we can be alert, really, all along the western, central, and the eastern sectors, northern, central, and eastern sectors of the LAC, I think we will be able to achieve our goal, which is to prevent the building of these advanced motorable roads all the way up to the Tri-Junction. And of course, we will withdraw if they stop, if they roll back their blueprints of coming all the way up to the Tri-Junction. So I think we will also withdraw, and so will they. If you look back at earlier such standoffs like Sundurong Chu 1987, even Daulat Beg Oldie, which happened 2013, these are the classic cases of China-India conflict on the border, which have ultimately resulted in no clashes and no deaths per se. Yes. So the last time we actually had active conflict was 1967. When we lost forces, and so did the Chinese. So I think better sense will prevail eventually. But right now, China is hurt. It's a hegemon that is hurt and is showing its peak because it had not expected that a relatively smaller power like India would challenge it so openly and be defiantly opposed to it. They are not going to have their way like they do with Philippines or Vietnam, which are much, much smaller in the South China Sea. With India, I think they've come to realize that they cannot dictate and, hector us like they used to do in the past. Absolutely. And I think that's a big lesson for the Chinese from this whole episode.
Okay, we leave it at that. Dr. Chaulia, thanks very much for joining us on the broadcast. Arun Anand and, of course, Mr. Chelani for speaking with us here on that contentious topic, if you will, at WION. We'll talk more when we come back after this short break. Do stay tuned.